What's going on, everyone? So I was just sitting here trying to make my blue Vader deck in person, and while I was going through some of the options, some of the cards that I needed for my deck, I realized something, and that is that a lot of you, and including myself, should probably avoid picking up a few of these cards, as based on what I've been watching in terms of market prices, these things have either tripled, doubled, quadrupled in price, either due to the lack of supply in Star Wars Unlimited or just due to, massive tournaments coming up like the Florida 5K that a lot of content creators and a lot of people watched, talked about, and of course that drives up the price. So I just want to give you all a warning about a few of these cards that we're going to go over in the video. If you do want to just say, screw it, I'm going to buy these cards, I do have a TCG player link in the description down below. And, well, it'll help you out, help me out. Let's dive into some of the cards. So I want to start us off with the big three. And I call these the big three because these are kind of the cards that have always been pretty expensive, Darth Vader especially. But each one of these have continuously risen in price for the most part. Darth Vader actually started off as like a $40 to $50 card in the first couple of weeks of the game, and well, as you can see, it has doubled. It's stuck around $80 to $90 over the past couple of months at this point. Luke Skywalker is a big one. That guy was actually hovering around $25 for around a month and a half of the game. And then over the past couple of tournaments, we saw Luke rise to, at the current moment, $60.75. All these prices, by the way, are the most recent as of recording this video on TCG Player. And then Boba Fett, this card used to be like $30. I actually opened, a box a little while ago and opened myself a Darth Vader, and I traded it away for $50 at the time. And that was, as I said, a couple of weeks ago or whatever. And it's already risen again to $63.50. Each of these three are quintessential cards for sort of the meta-defining decks, right? Boba Green, it runs both Vader and Boba Fett. You have things like Vader Green, which is running Vader. You have like all the different control decks like Iden Green, Krennic Green running Vader. And then, of course, if you talk about any of the Heroism Blue decks, they're going to be running Luke Skywalker. Each one of these are kind of cards that you almost build the deck because you get to play them. The thing with this is, they are arguably the strongest or one of the strongest cards. And so because of that, and in combination with that, their rarity, the lack of printing, and the fact that people are running oftentimes play sets of these in their tournament decks, these cards are extremely sought after. But with a little bit of time, with a little bit of options, these cards are going to drop in price, especially when we get more printings of just Spark of Rebellion, right? Right now, we have a massive supply issue. I don't know about anyone else or their LGS, but for mine, I haven't been able to, if I wanted to, pick up a pack in like 3 weeks or 4 weeks. We haven't even been able to draft Star Wars Unlimited because of the lack of supply. And so a lot of these cards are just simply higher because people can't pick them up anywhere. They can't open them. And while it does show the hyperspace version here, these are the prices of the plain version. I just like to use the hyperspace art because it looks way cooler. But of course, there's not just the big three. There's not just the unique legendary creatures or units here that we got to talk about. These three cards have just skyrocketed in price, mainly because Vader Blue took down the recent 5K tournament. But that, in conjunction with the lack of printing of Spark of Rebellion, we see a massive price spike. Now, this one is really crazy. And again, this is vastly because of the big tournament showing that Vader Blue had. Avenger has slowly risen. Back when, we were initially picking up cards for all of our different decks in the first few weeks of Star Wars Unlimited, Avenger was sitting at like $10, $15. This was obviously a very, very strong card from basically anyone that saw it, but it has almost tripled in price since then. Super Laser Blast. This one was a very unique effect. It was the only one of its kind. This one was hovering around $14 to $15 again in the first month or so of the game. I remember seeing this in draft and it was like $10, and I actually passed it to pick a card up for my deck. Now I'm sitting here, I'm like, dang, I could have had $33. This is one of the reasons why when I was going through the Vader Blue cards that I actually have a couple of Avengers. I have, which we'll talk about in just a moment, Vigilances. I drafted those. The Super Laser Blast was the one card I needed. I needed a full playset of that because I have every other card that I need for the deck for the most part. But that's another $100 in just Super Laser Blast. And I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see additional Wraths in future sets. but also again printing just more copies. If we ever see another Wrath or another top end control threat that can kind of take over the game, Avenger and Super Laser Blast are going to be dropping in price. Now Vigilance is a really interesting one because this one, when I drafted my Vigilance, I have 4 copies of Vigilance in my collection, at least 3 copies and 1 foil copy. I was drafting these as a rare draft at like $7. And when I went to go look at my Vigilance the other day, this thing skyrocketed up to $43 over, like, honestly, a couple of weeks. And it's mainly because all of the different controlling or more controlling decks are really taking advantage of the heal plus defeat against the aggro matchup. This is one of the things that makes Vader Blue kind of hang in there and heal back from the brink of death. It has over quadrupled in price over the past month, which is just absurd. This, out of any card that you're seeing on this list, was the most egregious for me because a lot of these started off at a decent price, right? Like, these are legendary cards for the most part. These are cards that are going to be very, very valuable, very rare. And so having them at like $10 is like, okay, that's, you know, expensive, but reasonable for card games. I don't know if I want to say reasonable in general, but Vigilance in particular, watching this card rise and rise and rise and rise simply because, well, for one, it's a double aspect card, so people are really interested in double aspect cards, but also two, because of all the control decks kind of performing well, people immediately sprung to pick up all their Vigilances, which is kind of interesting because this is a card that, if you remember my video about a week and a half ago, I said pick up these cards now. And at the time, I believe Vigilance was like $15 because Vigilance had risen. So I was watching it rise and I was like, yeah, I think Vigilance is probably a good pickup because it's only going to get stronger in the future. And guess what? If you were fortunate enough to pick up Vigilances, I didn't buy any at the time. I happened to have four in my collection at the time of recording that video, but it had almost tripled in price just for about a week and a half ago when I made that video. So if you're watching that video today, I definitely don't recommend you picking up Vigilance right now, as it's skyrocketed to $44 or $43. But yeah, it's really because we are lacking cards. The amount of legendaries in the existence of Star Wars Unlimited is super low because of the low printings, but also whenever you have a extremely popular meta deck coming into the fray, you're going to see people springing to try it out. I know that I was someone that was trying to build a Vader deck for a while. I mentioned it in my previous video talking about Vader Green, and I kind of put together Vader Green, but I didn't want to go out and buy Darth Vaders, and so I kind of stalled on it for a while. Then Vader Blue list came out, so I was messing around with that in my own personal list, and then I'm looking at all these cards. I'm like, heck no, I'm abandoning ship. Maybe I'll be able to trade for Super Laser Blast with the other expensive cards that I have. But yeah, don't even consider picking these up if you are trying to get the most value out of your collection. These things are definitely going to drop. Now we're going to talk about some aggro cards. Okay, so this has long been seen as the most budget friendly deck, or these are the most budget friendly lists. The Heroism red green aggro lists, generally speaking, are relatively cheap. That's been the perception. To be honest, that's no longer true. When I picked up K2SO and red 3s, they were $4 each, and that's how I picked them up. In fact, I actually opened most of my red 3s. K2SO I also picked up mostly from draft, but I had to pick up, like, I think 1 copy of Red 3 and 2 copies, or a copy of K2SO in order for me to finish off my Red Leia deck. And again, I picked these up at $4. These are the only rares that we're talking about in the video, which is partially why they are hovering around $15 each. But also, these cards are just extremely popular because that perception of it being an extremely budget-friendly list, people have sprung to pick up the entire deck. If you look at the Leia list or the Sabine list, you're running 3 copies of Red 3, you're running 3 copies of K2SO, that's already $90. You're running 3 copies of For a Cause, that can, spring another $30 or so. Then you're running whatever else you need to run inside the deck, that's probably going to bring you up to another $20 to $30. Those decks are suddenly $150, $160. Ewing Reinforcements also has risen from $2 when I picked it up to $10. And this is honestly, in general, mainly because of the lack of printings that we have of Star Wars Unlimited. But all these conceptions that we initially had about Star Wars Unlimited and, the budget friendliness of certain decks have gone completely out of the window, because I wouldn't consider a $170 deck, $160 deck for Sabine, let's say you include the sideboard, it could be even up to $200, a budget-friendly list, especially when you compare it to like other Boba lists in the past. Like a couple of weeks ago, we were looking at $450 Boba lists, which are now way more expensive, or any other decks that are like $200-300. We were like, yeah, those are expensive decks. We were looking at budget lists that are maybe like $50 and below, and the red 3s and the K2SOs used to fit into that kind of idea, but no longer. These things are risen, or have risen, and even as of late, like the past 2.5 weeks, these guys were hovering around $8 to $9 to $10. And again, over the course of multiple tournaments, and consistently seeing Sabine green, Sabine yellow, and the fact that they all run 3 copies of red 3 and 3 copies of K2SO because they're some of the most powerful cards, you're going to see them consistently rise, and they've already risen by 50% over about 2 to 3 weeks. Millennium Falcon, this card also has risen by about 50%. Now, this one has always been reasonably expensive, as arguably it's the best space unit in the entire game, but we start to see this guy continuously pop up a little bit anytime we see a tournament. One of the big reasons is because we saw Sabine yellow in the top 16 for the Florida 5K. As soon as that was, released and shown, and people were watching Millennium Falcon basically almost able to carry those Sabine yellow games, Millennium Falcon has risen in price yet again. Anytime I look at Millennium Falcon and I consider purchasing it, it's hovering around $20. And then, I look away for a second, come back, and boom, it's suddenly $35, $36, $40, whatever it is. And again, these oftentimes rise simply because people see them in tournaments. They want to pick up the Millennium Falcons, and there's not a lot of Millennium Falcons in circulation, especially since it's a legendary, which is kind of crazy considering that both Red 3 here and K2SO are rares, which are significantly easier to find, and yet they still hover around $15. So that is kind of all the cards I really wanted to just maybe steer you all in a different direction for the time being. I think that one of the biggest things about all 3 of these sets of cards, the big 3, all the different like signpost legendary units here, the control cards, and then the aggro cards. Again, we're seeing these just prominently across every single deck in every tournament. And so there's 2 things that you can wait for. One, you can just wait for the additional printings. I believe when they start releasing more product into the LGS and into circulation, we're going to see a drop in price. We've already started to see people picking up packs and booster boxes for like $10, $12 each. Booster packs, that is, which is like almost double the price, or in some case double the price. People picking up booster boxes for like $200, $240 or whatever, which is absurd pricing. Because of that, all these cards continuously rise because people are obviously buying these for overpriced amounts, and then they're selling them for overpriced amounts. The second thing is, when we get another set in Shadows of the Galaxy, we're going to see a meta shakeup. Right now, we are consistently seeing, despite, varying decks and new leaders coming into the fray, we are seeing the same cards across all of those decks, right? We were seeing Iden Green as the premier control list at the very beginning of this meta. We were seeing Avengers. We were seeing Super Laser Blast. We were even seeing Vigilance in some cases. We were seeing aggro decks. We were seeing 3 copies of Red 3, 3 copies of K2SO, 3 copies of Millennium Falcon. And we were seeing any deck that involved any of these colors, we were seeing 3 copies of each of these. When we see another set, all of these cards are going to be kind of put up on the chopping block. Okay, can you compete? I'm sure they will be able to, but can you compete with the other sets? And if you can, are you going to be able to compete in a fashion where you're going to want to run 3 copies of all of these cards? It's very possible, but at least you have other options. And if people are springing for those other options, again, it's going to drive down these prices. So again, just a little bit of a fair warning. If you want to pick up these cards, then you absolutely can. Of course, you can't play Paper Star Wars Unlimited without a deck, including these cards, unless you wanted a proxy, which I know that I don't mind, but if you're going to play in a tournament or whatever, you probably can't be doing that. And so this is something that you might have to do if you do want to play on that competitive space. I know for me, I'm going to be passing on my Vader Blue Super Laser Blasts unless someone at my store can potentially trade them. I know that I'll be sitting on my Vigilances. I hope to maybe trade them if I can, because again, if you can get rid of these cards when you have them, when they spike to these prices, if you think about it, like I've done like, I don't know, 12, 13 drafts or so at this point, and this Vigilance I've drafted 4 different times, and so with just those 4 Vigilances, I've basically paid for almost all of my drafts if I were to trade them out at this point, which is just absurd when you think about it. So hopefully I'll be able to get rid of them, because I would love to get paid $43 per card here, and maybe get myself some super laser blasts. But let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Are there any cards that you are on the opposite spectrum? I think there's one card that I wanted to mention here when I was thinking about is Emperor Palpatine. That card's sitting at $1.50 right now, and a lot of people are kind of just underrating it. I think just how powerful it is. You're going to see it start coming up again. A lot of the more hard control lists are running 2 to 3 of them, and it does a massive effect, and it's $1, right? These are like budget rares here we're talking about. So that's just a card I wanted to call out. But are there any other cards like that? Are there any cards that maybe you're like, you should pick these up, because I actually think they're going to rise? I'd be surprised if I saw these rise past additional printings and past the next set. If I saw these cards, like if I saw Darth Vader go up to like $100 after Shadows of the Galaxy was released, I would be very surprised. But I guess we will see. Of course, at the end of the day, this is my opinion and what my reasonings are. So if you disagree and you do want to pick up these cards, all power to you. And I'm not going to critique someone who wants to play paper Star Wars Unlimited, because guys, the game is sweet. The game is sweet, and I'll be honest, even though I haven't picked up some of these cards, I have been very tempted to, because I do want to play with these cards a little bit more in paper. I get to play with them online all the time, but not in paper all the time. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I will see you all in the next video.